Alright guys, in today's video we have some very interesting next-gen console news and info to go over and discuss. I'm sure this is going to be a very interesting conversation to many of you. We recently learned that the PlayStation 5 UI is running at native 4K with some HDR elements, and we also learned, based off of some reports that are coming out, that as of right now, and I have to emphasize that, as of right now, the Xbox Series X UI is apparently only running at 1080p resolution, which is interesting to say the least. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to get into it. There's also something else I do want to mention briefly before we get into it, and that has to do with just how well this video is doing over on the official PlayStation YouTube channel. It's trending, it's taking off, and I think there's a good reason for that. So before we get into it, if you could do me a favor, if you do end up enjoying the video, finding it informative, or you just want to support the content, make sure you hit the like button. It really helps it out more than you know. Hit the subscribe button if you are new and haven't, and hit the bell notification icon as well. But we're starting with the first look at the PlayStation 5 user experience. That's the title of the video that was released yesterday. I did do a live reaction to it, so if you're interested in checking that out and you haven't already, be sure to go check it out. And I'm looking at this, and as of the time of this recording, it's sitting at 7.3 million views in just a little over 24 hours. So it's been about one day, and it's already over 7.3 million views, which is crazy. I noticed yesterday it was at the #1 trending spot on YouTube, and as of right now, it's at the #4 spot. It has about 400,000 likes and only 11,000 dislikes. Now, why am I highlighting this? Why am I talking about this? It's because it just goes to show how important something like this is to the vast majority of people who are interested in upgrading to a next-gen console. I really like what Sony's doing here. This is the #1 thing that Sony has been doing right, in my opinion, since day one. We could talk about some of the things they maybe slipped up with, about, not announcing cross-gen games to the last minute and stuff like that. But if there's one thing they have gotten right, and I think they're going to continue to get right, and we're seeing it, especially now that we're, right at launch, they are making it clear that everything they're doing going into the next generation is really done in an effort to make it feel like a next-gen leap. To make it feel as though when you are going to buy a PS5, you're going to get a whole new experience. Something that's completely removed, completely different from the PlayStation 4 experience. If you wonder why Sony didn't double down on trying to make the most powerful console in the traditional sense and just focus on how many pixels they're going to push on screen, it's because they understood that, that's not the only thing that defines a next-gen experience. You look at what they're doing with the DualSense, you look at what they're doing with the UI. There's a reason why people are so excited for this. It's because they're actually trying to do things differently. And this is very different to the approach that Microsoft has been taking, where even though Microsoft is trying to, convince us, well, I mean, they are next-gen consoles, but I'm saying the word convince because they're, talking about how powerful the Series X is and all these things that they're doing. But other than that, everything else about the next-gen Xbox experience just feels like an iteration and not an innovation. Whereas I feel like a lot of what Sony's doing does come off as genuine attempts to innovate. And I have to give them credit for taking that risk, because they could have played it safe. They really could have. They could have made this UI look just like the PS4, saying if it's not broke, don't fix it, and called it a day and just, offered some minor improvements. They could have just stuck with the DualShock 4 controller. They could have just decided we're going to focus just on, pushing out as many compute units in the console as we can to get the highest resolutions. They could have done all those things, but they didn't. And that's why I'm highlighting this. And it kind of, helps us segue into the next conversation, which has to do with the Xbox Series X UI apparently running at 1080p. So obviously, if you listen to the video that Sony put out yesterday, one of the first things they said within the first minute or two was that the PlayStation 5 UI was designed for 4K TVs, 4K HDR TVs specifically, and the UI will be running at native 4K with HDR elements, which is very cool. And I think most people, if not all people, could say that's really nice. Well, John Lindemann of Digital Foundry kind of slipped up a little bit here maybe and said something. I don't know if he wasn't supposed to say this. I don't think it really matters. It was going to come out anyway, but he tweeted out, well, the big problem for me more than anything with the Xbox dashboard is the low resolution. I was disappointed with Xbox One X only offering 1080p UI rendering when the PS4 Pro did native 4K, but for 1080p UI to continue on the Series X, that's really not acceptable to me. And I have to agree 100% with John Linneman. I know how people are going to take this. They're going to take this as you're just trying to start a console war. You're just, once again, trying to hate on Xbox. You know what? I don't really care. You can think what you want, because I realize at this point in time that it does not matter what I say. People who want to believe what they want to believe are going to believe that. They're not going to listen to what I have to say. But for those of you who are willing to listen and hear me out, I do appreciate that, because honestly, I think the overwhelming majority of people would agree with me when I say that John Linneman is correct here in saying that that does not come off as acceptable. A 12 teraflop RDNA 2 next-gen console that can't output the UI at 4K? Are you kidding me? Now, I have to emphasize something here, and that is this will most likely change. At least it seems likely that it will, because we also heard from Jeff Grubb. He came out and told us that Microsoft basically said to everybody who they gave an Xbox Series X to not to dwell too much on the UI and the overall UI experience, because they are updating it, and that update will come out before, I'm assuming, before the Series X actually launches. So it seems likely that this is going to change. But what's interesting to me is the fact that there are so many people coming out of the woodwork all of a sudden to defend this. Suddenly there's so many people who would actually prefer a 1080p resolution UI from a 12 teraflop RDNA 2 machine. Now, I get it. I understand the arguments. We play games, not the UI. So let's free up as many resources as we can so we can allocate that to game development. I understand that. However, there are a few things here that I think we need to kind of remember. The first being that this is a claim that's being made while the Series S is a console that exists. Now, I could be wrong here because I'm not the most technical person in the world, but something just seems a little strange to me when I'm hearing that the number one focus should be, let's free up as much memory and as much RAM as we possibly can by making the UI run at 1080p on the Series X so it can be allocated towards the games, when there's also a console tethered to the Series X with significantly less RAM and memory. So in other words, every single game that's going to be made for the Series X also needs to be made for the Series S. Do you see what I'm saying here? It just doesn't really add up or make much sense to me. So if a single gigabyte of RAM for the Series X does need to be used to output a 4K UI, what is the big deal? How can it be a big deal when you also have another console that's tethered to this one with only 10 gigabytes of RAM? That any game you play on your Series X needs to work on that console that offers 10 gigabytes of RAM. So to me, it just doesn't add up and it doesn't make sense. I could be off the mark here, but just looking at it from a surface level, it seems kind of strange to me. So if you are somebody who really doesn't care, then that's fine. If you genuinely don't care, then there's no problem, and who cares, right? Like, if it's 1080p, no big deal. But I'm gonna be honest right now when I tell you that if this was on the other side, if it was Sony coming out saying that we can't do, or we don't want to do a 1080p UI, you know, or it came out that what we saw yesterday was in 1080p, I would be a little bit disturbed by that, because I would be thinking like, wait, this is really weird to me. The PS4 Pro does its UI in 4K, and the PS4 Pro also has some of the best looking games I've ever played. So this is why I can't really back up that whole, oh, but we want to free as much memory as we can for game development. Like, I'm sorry, that doesn't hold up to me, because I am playing on a console right now whose UI is output at 1080p and whose games are some of the best looking games I've ever seen in my life. So I just don't get it. It sounds like an excuse to me. And that's why I'm highlighting this, and that's why I'm focusing on it, and that's why I'm focusing specifically on what John Linneman is saying, because I think he is 100% correct when he says this is really not acceptable. Now, he says to me, making it clear that that's just his opinion, just like what I'm saying right now is only my opinion. Again, if you are somebody who really does not care, then more power to you. But that doesn't mean that there's not going to be millions of other people who are sitting there thinking, really? Like, you're going to sell me this $500 next gen 12 T-flop machine, but you can't even output the UI at 4K? And one last thing I have to say here, because I know I'm getting ranty once again, and I do apologize. Maybe I don't apologize, I don't know. This is how I talk sometimes. Look, for those who want to make it sound like the UI experience is really not significant at all, like I don't play the UI, I play games, you know what, that's fine. Again, more power to you, but you are being kind of ignorant when you say that because you're failing to realize, and again, this is why I highlighted just how popular, just how viewed this video was that Sony put out yesterday. You are failing to realize and acknowledge that there are millions upon millions of people who do care greatly about the UI because they understand that whatever the UI experience is going to be like on these next-gen consoles is most likely the experience you're going to be getting for the next 5 to 8 years, depending on how long the generation lasts. So if there's something really not great about that UI, something you don't like, you know, and you're just not excited at the idea that you're going to be potentially looking at a 1080p UI for the next 5 to 8 years, yeah, that's a valid complaint and that's a valid concern, and that's gonna not be a great thing for a lot of people, and that's actually gonna be a pretty big turnoff for them. So it may not be for you, but you cannot sit here and dismiss everybody else who does care, because believe me when I tell you, I bet you there's more people who would have a problem with this than not. Because yes, you may not play the UI, but you do experience the UI for many years, and it plays a vital role. One last thing here, I just have to add the cherry on top. What sense does it make to constantly focus on the 4K narrative ever since 2017 with the Xbox One X, have that narrative carry over to the Series X, and not offer a 4K UI? It makes zero sense. So this is why I don't want to hear any of the excuses that all of these individuals are making, because that's all it is. It's an excuse. It's damage control, whatever you want to call it. All right, it's just not acceptable. And here's where I'm going to end the video. I firmly believe and expect that the Series X UI will be 4K. That's how I'm going to end the video, because even though I could sit here and try to make fun of it, that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm just calling it out like this is pretty bizarre. Microsoft said it themselves. They didn't want these individuals to focus on the UI and most likely the resolution of the UI, because it will be updated. And I guarantee you that update will be 4K. And suddenly, all of these individuals who are perfectly okay with the 1080p UI, in fact, they would prefer it, something tells me they're not going to be that upset when they find out the UI is actually going to be in 4K. But hey, what do I know? That's going to do it for the video, guys. Again, I know it was a little bit ranty, but you know, I put out a single tweet about this, you know, being as innocent as I can about it, just saying I think it would be pretty lame, and apparently I'm just looking to start a console war. So I realize it doesn't matter what I say, because people are going to perceive me as they want to perceive me, and they're not really going to listen. So for those of you who stuck around to the end of the video, thank you so much. I appreciate your support. Leave your thoughts down in the comments below. I will be very interested to see what you have to say. Again, leave the video a like if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel if you're new and haven't already. Hit the bell notification icon so you never miss an upload, and feel free to share this video out on top of all that. But until next time, guys, take care.